Hey guys, Luke here at the eDrum workshop. Hope you're having a great day. One of the obvious benefits of using electronic drums or a hybrid kit is the ability to use those electronic sounds you just can't make with an acoustic instrument. There's plenty of cool tricks and techniques that you can use on your acoustic drums to replicate those sounds, but sometimes you're not after just replicating those sounds, you want to actually use a specific sound. The main drawback with these sounds though is that a lot of the time they're based just on a single sample, whether that's from a sample pack you've bought or downloaded, or whether it's from inside your drum module. In some situations, that's not a problem at all. You just need to fire off a hand clap and off you go. But in other situations, you might actually want to play those samples as one of the main elements of your drum kit. And playing one-shot samples as a main kit element can be quite uninspiring. The same sample just firing again and again at different velocities can be a bit dull. You might have a track that calls for a big fat electro sort of dubstep style snare drum, but you might also want to implement some ghost notes or rolls into your grooves too. So how do we go about making these sounds more playable? Enter the sample layering features of many of the more modern drum modules. I've got a Roland TD-50 here that I'm going to demonstrate on, but these principles and a lot of the same parameters can apply to the Roland TD-17 or the TM6 Pro, because they're both based on the architecture of the TD-50. You might not quite have as many editing options on both of those modules as you do on the 50, but a lot of it will still apply. Some of these editing options are available on the spd-30, the Roland Octapad as well, but you will be limited only to the onboard sounds with an Octapad. If you have a different drum module that doesn't allow layering, but you do have access to something like a Roland spd-sx or a TM2, you should be able to MIDI link them together and do something kind of similar on those. It will work a little bit differently, and you'll probably have to work out another way to blend the sounds together, like with an external mixer or using the audio inputs. And you won't be able to treat the two parts like one sound like you can on the drum modules that will allow sample imports, but you will still be able to achieve some good results with it. There are other drum modules that allow sample imports, like the ElectroSMASH, the Drumit 3 and the Drumit 5, and even the Pearl Mimic Pro allows one-shot samples. But again, the approaches and the tools will be a little different to what I'm going to show here. If you know your module well enough and you know the feature set, you'll probably be able to see what I'm doing here and then even translate that to the module that you're working with. Because I don't really have much experience with the Elisa Strike or the Drumit range, I can't really offer any specifics. But stick around anyway, because hopefully these ideas will still inspire you to have a go. So let's jump over to the kit and we'll see what we can do to make our samples play a bit more like actual instruments. So I've got a couple of kits here to show you, and I've done a version of each one with just the imported samples and then a version with internal samples underneath so you can hear the difference. So this first one is super electro, and it starts off with this big chunky dance kick from the Nexus VST. Yeah, so pretty big. And then the snare drum's like a big dubstep style snare drum from a sample pack. So those are the two elements that really I'm trying to improve the playability of the most, because dynamically they're not really the most pleasing to play at the minute. Oh yeah, I've made a rim shot sample as well. And all I did for that was I went into Reaper and then I layered a rim shot sample that I liked with this snare drum. So here's how this plays at the moment. It's sort of functional as far as electronic kits go, but without any transitions between sounds or layers, you're just getting the same thing, either soft or hard, so it's not the most playable really. So I've got this other version of the kit here with internal layered samples, and you'll be able to note the differences. Oh yeah, the rest of the kit at the minute is pretty much just an acoustic style kit, but with dampened toms. Double hi-hat. So the new kick and snare sound like this. So to me, that's like instantly more playable. It lets you do ghost notes. So yeah, it plays much more naturally like an actual drum, but it just keeps that electronic element that's really important for the sound. So I'll show you now what I've actually done on the module to achieve this sound. I'll start with the kick here, and I'll go through it now, and I'll take off the sub-instruments so that you can hear the kick on its own. And then this next set of steps now is what I've done to help it blend with the imported sample so that the transitions aren't too jarring. I've gone with a 20-inch shell depth and a pinstripe head. You can tweak that, but the effect is quite subtle on this drum. Down tuning probably works okay. Yeah, different tuning seemed to work okay. It doesn't seem to be making a huge difference here. Playing wise, this tuning just worked well for me. I've gone with a plastic beater for a little more attack. No snare buzz. Adding snare buzz can give it more of an electronic feeling. Let's have a listen. But to be fair, the sample kind of covers this ground anyway, so it's not entirely necessary. And I've boosted the low end here because I find that a few of the Roland kicks on this module are a bit flat without it. And then on the next page, I've turned off the kit resonance. Some people will prefer to have it on. It pretty much just comes down to personal preference. It's not really for me, to be honest. And then I pretty much always go for the mics a little bit on the inside. Yeah, I find it gives a little bit more bass response and sort of tames those mids. Yeah, just get that back off. Again, it's going to sort of come down to whatever you think blends best with the sample you're working with. So, this is pretty much the kick drum that I use for layering with most samples, to be honest. I've kind of aimed for a bread and butter sound that blends well with most things that I throw at it. I've turned down some of the overhead and room because I find they just sound a bit synthetic. Mic width, yeah, you can play with this. Another one that I don't really think matters that much in this scenario. And then the transient designer, I like to add more attack onto this. You can play about with it, as you can see if I bring this down now. Yeah, it makes it quite a bit softer, but we want this one to hit quite hard, so I'm just going to pop it back up to, I think it was about here, wasn't it? Yeah, sounds good. And then the sample pretty much takes care of the rest, so let me just pop that back on. Yeah, it's pretty huge. Yep. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I pretty much always use the fade 3 option for sample fade in. I just think it sounds the most natural. So I'll just dial this back up a bit now, so then you can hear what it sounds like if you fade it in later. If you wanted to like play double kick with a sample like this, you'd probably go down this route. And if you wanted to learn how to play sloppy double kick, I could teach you that. But no, I think, yeah, this fade is about right for if you want to sort of slowly and naturally kind of bring that sample in. Yeah, feels pretty natural. You can crank the volume on it if you want to. Yeah, I mean, it makes it sound pretty massive, but I feel like if you're getting into that territory, you may as well just be using the sample on its own rather than blending it anyway. Actually, I'm going to fade that just a touch later. Let's have a listen to that. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm happy with that. Alright, so we'll move to the snare. Okay, so we'll take the sub off again. And yeah, I mean, I pretty much always use the walnut popper for layering snares. I think I'm actually going to do a video on it down the line because I think it is the best layer snare on here. So I've made it pretty dry sounding because you don't really need a great deal else going on once you're layering a sample on it anyway. I've gone for a deep shell. You know, it's kind of personal preference. A shallow one will still work. I just basically wanted to stack it with a bit more weight. You know, you're not really going to come across anybody using a 10-inch deep acoustic snare for these things, but, you know, it's not real, stuff it. I've muffled with quite a bit of tape. Not fully dead. But yeah, just kind of getting rid of that excessive ring. The overtone. You hear that most on the ghost notes on this one. Yeah, I'll just fiddle with this now so you can hear the difference. It's not really that necessary for this sound, so I've just left it in the normal position. And then the strainer and wire level, I've taken a bit of the wire level off because you've got to kind of consider the amount of top end that your sample's got already. You don't want it sounding too harsh. So if you put those wires up, yeah, there's a lot of top end presence. But yeah, I mean, like I say, this sample's already got a lot of that, so yeah, you don't want to overdo it and make it too harsh. It'll be too difficult to tame. I haven't changed any of the pitch or the decay here, and then with the mic position, I've gone with inside one again. I feel like this helps to tame that harshness as well, because if you go too far out, thin and gross. Whereas inside too far makes it a bit too thick and muddy, so I find the inside one's the right balance for me. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I don't go nuts with the overhead or room either on this one. And then with the mic width, the sample's pretty big on the stereo field. So you don't really need to increase that so much. And again, it's another case of just judging it by the sample. Transient designer. I'll just flick between off and on. You can just sort of hear the subtle difference, mostly on the ghost notes. For the main hit, yeah, it's not making like a massive difference on the main strike. Sample screen, fade 3, and then don't have the sample too loud again. So I personally think that's a really good balance between that big thwack like that you want from the sample but still being playable. You can still, yeah, you know, you can still roll it without it sounding like this. This one's playable. This is gross. There's a time and place for it sounding that electronic-y, but this feels more inspiring to play. So just a bit of work can make it much more enjoyable to play. So that's pretty much my go-to sort of dance kit that I use for like the dance tracks in my cover band, or even just for like messing around with dance stuff like this. So I managed to get through to the editing stage without realising that I hadn't shown off the EQ or the compression settings for any of these drums. So I'll just quickly run you through these now. So here's the kick drum and the snare. So you'll see with both of these that I've done quite an extreme dip around the mid-range. On the kick drum here, it's 1.25k. And the reason for this is that for me, at least, there seems to be some quite nasty, synthetic sort of sounding frequencies around this point that if we get rid of them, it just seems to round out the sound in a bit more of a pleasant kind of way. So I'll just give you a quick demonstration of what I mean now. You'll hear that this is quite rounded and sort of warm sounding. Super beefy sound, but now if I roll this back up, there's a very synthetic impact noise in the sound, and I felt that at least when tying this sound together it didn't need it at all. So as I sort of juggle it around now, you'll be able to probably hear what I mean. You may or may not think it makes a big difference, but if you keep listening, yeah, I just feel that you can lose that part of the sound entirely without losing the character of the sound that you actually want. Okay, and then onto the snare drum. There's a tiny boost to the 4K range, not entirely necessary. It just sat a bit nicer through a PA for me this way. So if I just pop this EQ off now. There's a really bizarre frequency on the walnut popper snare that just sounds really gross. And I've noticed it every time I've gone to use this snare. It changes a bit depending on the tuning of the drum, but it's around 1K when you don't tune it up high. Bring it back in. So it's this bit right here. I know that's obviously really accentuated and any frequency will sound horrible cranked that high, but when I bring it back down you can still hear it. But then as soon as I EQ it back out, I just think it sounds much cleaner and far more usable like this. It's obviously going to be subjective, but I've noticed through a PA especially these frequencies are really problematic. And I'm pretty certain that the bulk of people's issues with the TD-50 sounds lay in the errant frequencies like this. So we'll move on to the compression settings next. Pretty heavily compressed. A quick A and B. So it's reducing the gain quite a bit, and then it's kind of gluing the sample and the stock sound together, and then the makeup gain brings it back up again. If I take the makeup gain off, then the compression's gain reduction isn't compensated for, and you'll have an imbalance in the volumes. So I'll just put that back where it was. You know, that might actually be riding the output just a little bit too strong. Hold on. We'll take it up to 3. Yeah, so our hardest hit is just making the output touch the 0 dB. So we'll move on to the snare. So pretty heavily compressed once again. The ratio is even more extreme on this one, but that seems to work well for snare drums. It's all about gluing the two sounds together really, so that they sound like one individual sound rather than just a sample slapped on top of another snare drum. And dynamically it's bringing up the lower volume strikes in relation to the higher volume strikes too, so if you like your ghost notes to cut through, then compression is your friend. So what's quite important to get right with a snare sound like this is the attack time of the compressor, because if you have the attack set too fast, then what's going to happen is you're going to squash the initial attack of that sound. You want to let that initial attack through, so I'll just turn that down to demonstrate. You can even see it here on the gain reduction. It's reducing the gain even more because it's reacting to the loudest part of the sample. So setting your attack too fast is going to take that punch out of your samples. So you want the compressor to work on everything just beyond that transient. Oh, whoops. So that's sort of the quick version of how the EQ and compression are interacting with these particular sounds. The reason I sort of forgot about it was because I don't really change these a lot between the different layered snare and kick sounds that I use, unless there's like a specific reason to do so. Okay, let's get back to the rest. So I'm just going to blast over this next one really, because I've used the same kick and snare just with different tunings and stuff. I've used a similar cymbal set underneath the samples, different toms, but pretty much the same principles. I actually think that 808 kits sound pretty cool as they are, and they're kind of like more immediately playable than the samples I was using for the last one. 808 snares are like weirdly fun already to sort of roll on and play with, and you know, that's used a lot in like hip hop and trap, but they're still not like properly natural to play. So the approach to this kit was more about sort of making it sound a little bit more live and giving it a fun sort of poppy snare drum underneath the 808 sound that's already there. So here's a quick sort of rundown of all the drums, and then I'll cap off with some playing examples at the end. You'll see that I've gone the other way here and taken some of the attack out of the kick drum because the 808 sample's got a very peaky attack anyway. Yeah. So the biggest issue I was sort of having here was pitch matching that 808 tom and the other tom sample that I was using. I'm not 100% sure if I nailed it, to be honest, but I think I got it roundabouts right. Yeah, you can't fully see what's going on here, but basically I've just layered the stock 808 cymbal samples over some other cymbals. And this one is a downlifter sample that I've imported. So that pretty much wraps it up. I hope some of the tricks and techniques that I've shown here might help you achieve more inspiring electronic sounds for your music and have a bit more fun with them. As I said earlier, different modules will have different ways of achieving these results, but hopefully there's enough ideas here to sort of get you creating. If you enjoyed this video, please do the YouTube stuff, like, subscribe, all that lot. Share the video with somebody else who might enjoy tweaking their drums. I've got quite a few other videos lined up in a similar vein to this, so keep your eyes peeled for those. But for now, hope you have a great day. Cheers!